Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into excerpts from a truly ambitious text, Nihilism, Inc.
Yeah, ambitious is definitely the word.
This is not your typical book, right? It's this sweeping, grand critique of, well, pretty much all of European civilization.
It really is. It tries to fuse history, philosophy, environmental science, basically everything into one coherent and, frankly, pretty devastating narrative.
And the core argument, the big thesis, it's saying that the global environmental crisis we're seeing, the ecocide, it's not an accident.
Not at all. The author argues it's not some unforeseen tragedy, not just a slip-up with technology or policy.
So what is it then?
It is, according to the text, the predictable, logical, almost intentional end result of a huge, like, 2,000-year-old mistake in Western thinking.
Wow, okay, a 2,000-year-old mistake. So the root problem isn't just, bad policies or people buying too much stuff.
Nope, it goes much deeper. It's about what the book calls defective metaphysical notions, basically how we fundamentally think about what reality is.
That core understanding is flawed. And that mistake started way, way back.
Millennia ago, yeah. These flawed ideas, the sources argue, they started cropping up in ancient Greece.
Okay.
Then they got developed, reinforced, sometimes, kind of baked into aspects of Christian thought during the medieval period. And then they got hardwired in to the science that emerged, mechanistic materialist science.
And from science into everything else.
Pretty much. Formalized by economic theories, and then finally fully institutionalized in the global capitalist system we have today.
So these deep down ideas about reality, they basically act like blinders. They define what we can even see or understand.
Exactly. They limit our comprehension, stop us, the text argues, from seeing the world's intrinsic value and fragility. We just don't perceive it because our basic concepts don't allow for it.
Right.
And what's fascinating, or maybe kind of terrifying, is that the text argues we can't even talk about solutions, but any kind of fundamental reorientation, until we drag these assumptions out into the light.
Because they're just taken for granted, like the air we breathe.
Precisely. They're not philosophical positions people consciously sign up for. They're embedded in our language, our institutions, our daily habits.
So trying to critique them is like trying to see the water you're swimming in.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The text says this challenge is different from any other intellectual task because the very tools you need for the critique, your ability to question reality, might be compromised by the thing you're trying to analyze.
Okay, that's a heavy start. To make this more concrete, the book uses a historical analogy, right? Comparing now to ancient China.
Yes, specifically China in the 3rd century BC. It's a really stark comparison.
Tell us about that. What's the parallel?
Well, you look back at the Qin dynasty. They used this philosophy called legalism, incredibly ruthless, focused entirely on control, efficiency, standardization.
And it worked, in a way.
It worked to unify the warring states into one centralized empire. But through sheer force, aggression, suppressing all dissent, utter ruthlessness.
Okay. And the analogy is that Western civilization
has done something similar, using its own kind of aggression, economic, political, technological. It's unified the world, but into one giant monolithic economic system.
So the legalist state's focus on control and efficiency mirrors modern capitalism's drive for global efficiency, resource extraction, treating everything as just inputs.
Exactly. The text draws that direct line. The ruthlessness is comparable, just maybe less obviously violent day to day, but perhaps more comprehensively controlling in the long run.
And the implication, this kind of forced uniform unity, it's inherently unstable.
That's the argument. Whether it's the Qin political machine or the global capitalist economic machine, this kind of totalizing system reads internal nihilism, erases alternatives, and sets itself up for either collapse or potentially radical transformation. The goal is control, viewing nature and people as resources.
Not as participants in something living or creative.
Right, just cogs in the machine or resources to be managed efficiently.
Okay, let's ground this huge philosophical argument. The book backs this up with data, right? Real-world consequences. Section 2 talks about ecocide as applied nihilism.
Yeah, it doesn't just stay in the realm of ideas. It connects the philosophy directly to the alarming empirical evidence. And the starting point is incredibly fundamental. Soil.
The actual ground beneath our feet.
The foundation of everything. The text highlights this global crisis. Historically, nearly 2 billion hectares of land. That's, bigger than South America. Lost, gone, degraded by human activity over time.
2 billion hectares. That's a staggering historical loss. What about the rate now?
That's where it gets really terrifying. The net annual soil loss globally is estimated around 26 billion tons every year.
26 billion tons. It's hard to even picture that.
It is. We're basically bleeding our vital topsoil into the oceans, into the air, at a rate that's completely unsustainable. It takes nature centuries, millennia to build good topsoil.
And the U.S. example makes it more concrete.
Yeah, the text cites that U.S. agricultural soil resources were cut roughly in half in just 150 years. Think about that. Half the productive capacity gone in like 6 or 7 generations.
And Oklahoma, even faster.
Even faster. In parts of Oklahoma, something like 30% of the soil organic matter was destroyed in a single generation, just wiped out.
And this connects to desertification.
Directly. This kind of soil destruction is a major driver. Desertification now affects, 45 million square kilometers globally, putting 850 million people at direct risk. Famine, displacement. It's a human catastrophe rooted in ecological destruction.
And it's not just dry lands, irrigated land too.
Yeah, another shocking statistic from the text. About half the world's irrigated land, the stuff we rely on for high-yield crops, is already compromised. Salinity, waterlogging. Basically, the intensive methods are poisoning the land over time.
Which brings us to the critique of modern farming itself, like the Green Revolution. Hailed as a savior, but the book sees it differently.
Very differently. It sees it as a prime example of this short-term mechanistic thinking, causing long-term ecological disaster. An accelerator of nihilism, essentially.
Oh, so take hybrid rice strains, for instance. They do yield more, right?
They yield more grain, yes, in the short term. But the book points out the hidden costs. One, they're often protein deficient, so you get more bulk, but less nutrition.
Okay, that's one issue.
Two, they are completely dependent on massive inputs of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer.
Which, as you said, damages the soil long-term, acidifies it.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes the soil chemistry and biology, kills off the natural ecosystem in the soil. And three, these hybrids require huge amounts of pesticides.
Creating this chemical dependency?
A treadmill.
A perfect description. The soil becomes inert, addicted to chemicals.
Right.
Yields might eventually fall below the original indigenous crops. But by then...
The original seeds might be gone, lost diversity.
Precisely. We lose the genetic resilience we desperately need, especially with climate change. We trade long-term adaptability for short-term, chemically propped-up yields. And the pesticide use itself. The book says it's counterproductive.
Hugely. It disrupts the whole ecosystem, kills beneficial insects, natural predators. So what happens? Pests develop resistance. You need stronger, nastier chemicals.
And you end up losing more crops.
That's the insane part. The text cites U.S. data. Between the 1940s and 1970s, crop losses to insects doubled, even though pesticide use increased tenfold.
10 times the poison, twice the damage. That doesn't sound like rational management.
It's the opposite of rational, if you look at the whole system. It's applied nihilism, prioritizing the immediate, controllable output, ignoring the systemic breakdown it causes, driven by the market's demand for predictable, uniform commodities.
Okay, beyond agriculture, the book also connects this thinking to broader climate and ecosystem collapse, right? The familiar big picture issues.
Yes, forest destruction is a key focus, accelerating loss 30 million hectares a year, including huge swaths of tropical rainforest.
Which are critical biodiversity hotspots.
Absolutely. Housing maybe 40% of the world's known species. Wiping them out is wiping out potential solutions, resilience, unimaginable complexity.
This destruction plus fossil fuels, that's the engine of climate change.
Driving the greenhouse effect. The predicted temperature increase 2.5 to 5.5 degrees Celsius in a century. The text emphasizes just how radical that is.
Oh, radical.
It's a bigger temperature shift than the entire difference between the last ice age and now, compressed into a tiny fraction of the time.
Wow. So viewed through this Nihilism, Inc. lens, human activity isn't just activity, it's a geological force.
A geological force operating with a fundamentally anti-ecological mindset. That's the argument. We're reshaping the planet based on these flawed metaphysical assumptions.
And there's an analogy the book uses to tie this together, something about fishing.
Yeah, the fishing analogy. It's really good for explaining the loss of resilience.
How does it work?
Imagine a fishery. You can harvest it really heavily for a long time, maximizing your catch year after year. It looks sustainable, profitable. But what you're actually doing, slowly, invisibly, is reducing the fish population's diversity, its age structure, its ability to cope with change. You're stripping away its resilience.
Making it more fragile.
Exactly. The system becomes brittle. Then, inevitably, some unexpected shock hits a disease, a sudden change in water temperature, pollution.
And the whole thing collapses. Because it had no buffer left.
Total collapse.
Yeah.
Because the resilience was sacrificed for maximum short-term extraction. The book argues this is precisely what we're doing to the global ecosystem, replacing diverse, resilient natural systems with simplified, unstable monocultures and managed landscapes, all for short-term economic gain.
Sacrificing the ability to bounce back.
Yeah, and that's pure nihilism in practice, assuming you can control everything, ignoring the inherent value and dynamism of the system itself.
Okay, so the diagnosis is pretty bleak. Before getting to any alternative, the text takes aim at modern ethics, right? Saying they can't fix the problem.
Right. This is a key part of its synthesis. It argues that the dominant ethical frameworks we use today, specifically rights theory and utilitarianism, are actually part of the problem.
How can that be? Aren't they supposed to guide us towards good outcomes?
The argument is they're built on the same flawed foundations. They emerged, historically, from the breakdown of the medieval world alongside capitalism and mechanistic science.
So they share the same DNA, so to speak.
Exactly. They both fundamentally assume a world of inert matter, devoid of intrinsic meaning or value. And they assume society is just a collection of separate, egoistic individuals, driven by desires and calculations.
Nature is just stuff, and people are just self-interested calculators.
Pretty much. That's the shared metaphysical bedrock. So when you look at environmental debates or economic policy,
It's always a fight between individual rights, my right to use my property, versus utility, the greatest good for the greatest number, calculated how?
often through cost-benefit analysis. Trying to put a price tag on everything, weigh the pros and cons numerically.
And the book says both sides of that argument are flawed.
It calls them a matching pair of incommensurable fictions.
Incommensurable fictions, meaning they can't be reconciled, but they're both unreal.
Unreal in the sense that they mask what's really going on. They're incompatible on the surface, individual rights versus collective good, but they work together.
How do they work together?
They distract us. They keep the argument focused on how to divide up the spoils of a world we've already defined as meaningless, disposable stuff, or how to manage the competing claims of isolated individuals. They prevent us from questioning that initial definition of reality itself.
So the debate itself reinforces the underlying nihilism.
That's the claim. It masks the exercise of power, an arbitrary will that decides which right or which utility wins out in any given situation.
But hang on, hasn't utilitarianism, like cost-benefit analysis, sometimes been used for environmental protection? You know, arguing a wetland is valuable because it provides X dollars worth of flood control.
That's a really important point, and the text addresses it. Yes, you can sometimes get a good outcome that way, but look at how you got there.
By putting a price tag on the wetland.
Exactly. You have to translate its intrinsic ecological complexity, its unique being, into an abstract monetary value to make it count in the calculation. You're still using the mechanistic reductionist tools.
And this ties into the idea of management by experts.
Directly. Utilitarianism, with its focus on objective data and calculation, fueled the progressive conservation movement in the U.S. Think Gifford Pinchot, Theodore Roosevelt.
Their goal was efficient management.
Efficient management of the nation's resources, treating the country like a big corporation, applying scientific principles run by technical experts.
Which meant overriding local concerns or democratic processes sometimes.
Explicitly, for the greatest good for the greatest number, as defined by the experts doing the calculating. It sidelines participation and inherent value in favor of top-down, rational control.
So whether you champion individual rights or expert-led utility maximization, you're still stuck in that same basic worldview.
Still operating within that cold, calculable, mechanistic frame. A world of inert matter and calculating individuals. The philosophical error persists, untouched.
Okay, let's trace that error back. Section 3, the historical roots of substantialism. This is where the book gets really philosophical, tracing the intellectual history.
Yes, this is the intellectual core. It argues Western nihilism wasn't born in a factory or a bank, but in a specific philosophical choice made way back in ancient Greece.
And that choice was?
To privilege eternal, unchanging forms, what they called being, over the messy, dynamic, changing reality of the world becoming.
Why were they so afraid of change, of becoming?
Well, think about it. If everything is constantly shifting, flowing, how can you have certainty? How can you have stable knowledge? Truth. It's deeply unsettling if you're looking for permanence.
So the pursuit of being was a search for solid ground.
Exactly. For eternal truths, unchanging essences, things that exist outside of time and flux. You see it even before Plato, with someone like Pythagoras.
Pythagoras, with the triangles.
Right. He elevated mathematics, especially numbers, beyond just practical use in commerce. He saw numbers as these pure, eternal, perfect truths, completely opposed to the messy, fluctuating values of the marketplace.
And Plato really runs with this.
Plato formalizes it. True knowledge for him can only be of these eternal, unchanging forms or ideas. The physical world we perceive is just a shadow, a flickering, imperfect copy.
And the consequence of valuing the abstract forms over the physical world is...
You implicitly devalue the physical world itself, the creative activity of nature.
Yeah.
And you devalue the human activities involved in shaping and interacting with that world, farming, crafting, building. Labor becomes less noble than contemplation of the eternal.
Because it's dealing with messy, changing, becoming, not perfect being.
Precisely. And this, the book argues, lays the foundation for substantialism.
Substantialism, the idea that reality is made up of
Enduring separate things or substances, objects that have fixed, essential properties that exist independently of time or relationships, like little metaphysical building blocks.
And this philosophical idea didn't just stay in the academies, it shaped society.
Massively. The book makes a fascinating connection between this philosophy and the rise of Western individualism. It points to a linguistic shift.
In language. How?
Starting around 400 AD or so, you see the increasing use of the I-saying habit in Western languages, putting the I, the first-person pronoun, right at the front, before the verb.
So instead of runs the dog, it becomes I run. The focus shifts to the agent.
Exactly. Language itself starts to construct the self as this primary, enduring, separate entity, an I, that exists before the action, independent of the context. A substantial self.
A little self-contained substance.
Right, and that view of the human being as a separate substance fits perfectly with the emerging machine metaphor for nature.
Ah, the machine. It becomes the dominant way to understand everything.
It triumphs because it's simple, it's predictable, and it serves the needs of the emerging capitalist order incredibly well. Nature becomes inert matter, resources to be exploited. Society becomes a collection of individuals, like parts in a machine.
And Thomas Hobbes is key here.
Absolutely pivotal for institutionalizing this. Hobbes took the methods used to understand machines like clocks, taking them apart to see how the gears work, and applied that to society.
The resolutive compositive method.
That's the one. Break society down to its smallest parts, which for Hobbes are these isolated, egoistic individuals driven by appetites and aversions, constantly seeking power. Then reconstruct society from the interactions of these human mechanisms.
Which sounds eerily like the basis for modern economics and political science. Rational actors maximizing utility.
It is the basis. It provided the intellectual justification, the research program. Humans are fundamentally selfish calculating machines. This view underpins rights theory, utilitarianism, economics. It makes self-interest seem not just natural, but scientifically validated.
And then this feeds into evolutionary theory. The machine view of humans and society gets projected onto nature.
A powerful feedback loop, exactly. Think about English industrial society in the 19th century. Hyper-competitive, ruthless struggle, division of labor. Even Marx saw how Darwin's model of nature mirrored this social reality.
So Darwinism, or rather social Darwinism, takes this mechanistic struggle and applies it back to society.
Led by figures like Herbert Spencer, he took the survival of the fittest idea, which itself reflects that competitive mechanistic view, and used it to justify social inequality.
His views on poverty were pretty extreme, weren't they?
Chillingly so. Spencer argued against helping the poor, the sick, the unfit. He saw social reform as interfering with a necessary, purifying process.
Society needed to excrete its weaker members.
That's his term. It's the ultimate expression of this applied nihilism. Suffering isn't a tragedy or a moral failing. It's a necessary part of the machine's efficient functioning. Progress requires eliminating the inefficient parts.
How did such a brutal view become scientifically acceptable?
Because it offered a seemingly objective, deterministic explanation. It removed morality and replaced it with mechanical necessity. It reinforced the idea that the only real meaning is the struggle for power and efficiency. Anything that gets in the way, compassion, community, ecological limits, is just sentimental weakness or an obstacle to be overcome.
So these ideas weren't just debated, they were built into the system. Section 4V talks about institutionalization.
Right. The mechanistic worldview isn't just floating around. It's actively maintained and reproduced by key institutions. They function as control mechanisms.
Starting with science itself, the funding structures.
Exactly. Where does the money go? The text argues it's heavily biased towards research that produces marketable, patentable knowledge, especially knowledge that fits the mechanistic view.
Like genetic engineering. seeing life as code to be manipulated.
Perfect example. Huge funding there.
Hmm.
Compare that to funding for, say, epigenesis, the
Mm.
complex, holistic way organisms actually develop form, or for deep, anti-reductionist ecology.
Those fields don't produce quick technological fixes or easily marketable products.
Not usually. And worse, from the system's perspective, they challenge the simple, controllable, mechanistic picture of reality. They don't train people in marketable reductionist skills either. So funding is scarce.
And this bias gets reinforced culturally. Labels like hard science.
Absolutely. The text points out how mechanistic, quantitative science gets labeled masculine or hard, implicitly marginalizing more holistic, qualitative, or feminine approaches. Scientists, often using complex math and jargon.
Become like a new priesthood, guarding the mechanistic dogma.
That's the analogy used, ensuring adherence across fields, from physics to economics. It maintains the illusion of objective truth while reinforcing a very specific, limited worldview.
And education systems play a role too, not just teaching facts, but shaping people.
A huge role. Universities, the text argues, have largely become mechanisms for sorting and grading people, increasing the market value of their labor, certifying them for the machine.
But it's deeper than just job training. It's about shaping how people are.
Yes, it's about inculcating the right habitus.
Bourdieu's idea, the embodied way of being in the world.
Exactly. The learned, almost unconscious dispositions, how you manage time, how you speak, how you prioritize efficiency, how you inhabit physical spaces like offices or labs. The whole environment trains you to be an efficient component.
To internalize the logic of the machine.
Right. You learn to value abstract metrics, calculability, control, over spontaneity, complexity, or relational values. It happens subtly, constantly.
And the media seals the deal, the consciousness industry.
Completes the ideological enclosure, yeah. It creates the illusion of debate, the text argues, but it's actually tightly controlled.
How? Not through outright censorship usually, but...
Through censorship by subterfuge.
Yeah.
Using labels, framing, deciding who counts as an expert, managing the flow of information, relying on cliches, and crucially, turning everything into entertainment.
News, politics, crises, all become spectacles.
Yeah, a constant stream of disconnected, emotionally charged, but ultimately superficial information. This creates, the author says, the subjectless subject. Someone who is bombarded with information but feels powerless, unable to synthesize it, unable to act meaningfully, just passively consuming the spectacle.
And the spectacle reinforces a certain view of the world.
Absolutely. It constantly presents this stark binary, the glamorous, high-consuming, successful winners versus the impoverished, backward, dangerous losers, often racialized or demonized as terrorists, etc.
And the messages?
That being realistic, being hard-headed, means accepting life as a brutal competition. Anything else, environmental concern, social justice, questioning the system, is naive, weak, loser talk. It reinforces the nihilistic status quo.
Now, interestingly, the book doesn't exempt radical movements like Marxism from this critique. It sees them as also failing to escape nihilism.
Yes, and this is a sign of its intellectual rigor, I think. It engages in self-critique, not just bashing capitalism. It argues that Marxism, historically, often fell into the same traps.
How so? Marxists were often anti-metaphysics, pro-science.
Right, and that often led them to embrace mechanistic interpretations of history, seeing it as an inevitable machine grinding towards revolution. Or, perhaps worse in practice, it led to distortions when they actually gained power.
Like in the Soviet Union, the environmental devastation there wasn't just bad luck or incompetence.
The book argues it was rooted in a flawed philosophy, a kind of voluntarist Neoplatonism.
Voluntarist Neoplatonism. That's a mouthful. What does it mean?
It means believing that human will and consciousness, embodied in the party or the state, must impose rational order onto chaotic nature. It's about the transfiguration of nature by industry.
So forcing nature to conform to a human plan, subordinating spontaneity.
Exactly. Subordinating the messy, unpredictable creativity of nature and the spontaneity of human life to a grand, conscious design. Think of those massive Soviet projects.
Like diverting whole rivers.
Yeah, diverting rivers to irrigate cotton fields in Central Asia, leading to the Aral Sea disaster. That wasn't just a miscalculation. It stemmed from a deep philosophical belief that human consciousness should dominate and reshape nature entirely, imposing a rational, ideal order.
It sounds like another version of the Platonic impulse valuing the abstract plan over the concrete reality.
Precisely. Trading the domination of the capitalist market for the domination of the bureaucratic state plan. both rooted in the same fundamental rejection of becoming, of nature's intrinsic creativity and value, a different flavor of nihilism.
Okay, so after all this critique of Western philosophy, institutions, even radical alternatives, the book has to offer something positive, right? Section V, the alternative.
It does. It proposes a different metaphysical foundation altogether, process metaphysics.
Going back to thinkers like Heraclitus, everything flows.
Heraclitus, yes, and also drawing parallels with certain streams of Chinese thought. The core idea is to fundamentally change the root metaphor we use to understand reality
So ditch the machine metaphor.
and replace it with something like music, or a symphony, or a flowing river, an auditory analogy rather than a visual or mechanical one.
Why auditory? What does that capture?
It captures the idea that the fundamental reality isn't static substance, but dynamic process, an ordering activity, constantly unfolding, constantly becoming.
So things aren't fixed objects, they are.
Enduring patterns of activity. Think of a flame, or a whirlpool, or a living organism. They have a recognizable form, but they only exist through constant change, constant flow, constant interaction. Being is becoming.
Instead of what is this thing, the question becomes what is this process doing?
Exactly. It's a radical shift from the substantialist view that's dominated the West for millennia.
And if you change the metaphysics, you have to change the ethics too. How does justice look in this process view?
It's completely different. It's not about applying abstract universal rules to isolated individuals anymore. Justice becomes about understanding and appreciating the unique needs, potentialities, and context of a particular entity.
An entity being a person, a community, an ecosystem.
Yes, it requires recognizing their specific nature and what they need to flourish within the larger process. It also means acknowledging real differences in significance.
Like treating a person differently than a fence post.
Right. It affirms the reality of relationships, communities, ecosystems. They aren't just collections of individuals. They are processes with their own integrity. Justice is about right relationship within the flow.
And what about integrity? How is that redefined?
Integrity isn't just being consistent or honest in an abstract sense. It's about the coherence of a life lived justly, its narrative unity. It's about striving to be just to the world and to oneself within that ongoing process.
So a life of integrity is one that actively contributes to the positive unfolding of things, being self-causing.
Yes, participating creatively, consciously shaping one's path in relation to the whole, rather than just being passively pushed around by social forces or biological drives. It's about adding to the world's creative becoming.
And politically, this leads to the idea of a generative society.
That's the political ideal offered. It's not a blueprint for a perfect static utopia.
Because process is ongoing.
Exactly. A generative society is a structure, a set of institutions and cultural norms, whose main goal is to cultivate the fullest possible development of all its members' potentials.
Enabling them to participate in that creative becoming of society and nature.
Right. And the opposite, decadence, is defined specifically as a failure of representation. When political decisions ignore the powerless, ignore future generations, ignore the non-human world. When the system fails to nurture potential.
Okay, this all sounds quite holistic, community focused,
Yeah.
which makes the next step surprising. The book proposes nationalism as a solution.
Yeah, it's definitely the most counterintuitive proposals,
Yeah.
especially after critiquing so many ideologies. But it's a specific, reformulated nationalism.
How can nationalism, often associated with exclusion and conflict, fight global nihilism?
The argument is that only a powerful territorial ideology, something that creates a strong sense of shared place and destiny, has the necessary emotional and political force to resist the placeless, borderless logic of international capitalism.
Because capitalism just wants to dissolve all local ties for the free flow of money and goods.
Precisely. It atomizes communities, undermines national solidarity. The book argues that a reframed nationalism focused on creating an imagined political community is the only weapon potentially strong enough to counter that.
What does this reframed nationalism look like? It's not about ethnic purity or aggression.
No, definitely not. It's framed as creating a people's home. The Swedish term Folkhemspolitik is used as an example.
The Swedish model. How did that work as generative nationalism?
The idea was to build a society that transcended narrow class interests, just workers versus just business, to manage the national economy for the benefit of all citizens, including future ones, and the national environment. It fostered a sense of shared responsibility.
So things like strong welfare states, housing policies, they created a shared stake in the nation.
Yes, binding people together, ensuring industry, served national social goals, not just global markets. It created a cultural and social unity strong enough to organize consent around values other than just profit, justice, integrity, shared becoming.
So it's nationalism as a container, a political boundary drawn around a community committed to resisting nihilism and fostering its own generative potential.
That seems to be the idea, a place-based resistance against the placeless machine, but one focused internally on nurturing potential, not externally on domination, creating a space where a different kind of process can unfold.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. We've gone from ancient Greece to modern ecocide through critiques of science, ethics, politics, even Marxism, and landed on process metaphysics and a kind of generative nationalism. So what's the big takeaway?
I mean, the sheer scope is staggering. Connecting Platonic ontology to climate change via capitalism, it's a massive intellectual feat.
And its real merit, perhaps, is forcing us to confront those deep assumptions, the ones we don't even know we have.
Absolutely. That core belief that reality is just material objects, abstract numbers like GDP, and efficient mechanisms. The book challenges that fundamentally. It makes you realize the crisis isn't just out there in the environment, it's in here, in our heads, in our deepest concepts.
Our failure to act isn't just political cowardice or lack of tech. It's rooted in how we define what's real and what matters.
Exactly. Which leads to the final, really provocative point the text makes.
Which is?
In a society where money is the ultimate measure of value, the logical endpoint of that substantialist, mechanistic thinking, anything you can't easily put a price on.
Like wilderness, species integrity, the suffering of the poor.
They become shadowy, unreal. They literally don't register in the dominant reality defined by economic calculation. They get ignored when the hard decisions are made.
Because they don't fit the spreadsheet.
They don't exist in the calculation. And the book goes further, suggesting people are driven to sacrifice their own future well-being, their own integrity for status now. Why?
Because money is the main way to get status in this system.
It's the socially validated path, which just feeds the nihilistic machine, the zero-sum game.
So final thought for the listener.
It really comes down to this. If the book is right, if achieving genuine integrity means living justly within the world's creative process, if it means putting limits on what you'll do for money or status, how much success, as defined by the current system, are you willing to forego? How much are you willing to change how you act to actually contribute to that creative becoming, instead of just being another cog, however successful, in the nihilistic machine?